I guess the cat's out of the bag now. We are spreading the plague like it's the 14th century. Hello Internet, my name is Damian Michaels, but you can call me Blue, and welcome back to another episode of Blues Brews. This week, we're spreading the plague with Rat Tribal and Brawl. This deck is pretty straightforward, so we're just going to jump straight into things. Our commander is Lord Skitter, the Sewer King. He creates a rat token at the beginning of our combat and lets us eat our opponent's graveyard when another rat enters the battlefield. The deck is full of various rat cards, including 10 copies of Rat Colony and a bunch of rat support. There are a handful of non-rat creatures that help the deck function, but we fix that by turning them into rats with Maskwood Nexus. I'll explain everything else important as we go, but let's just jump straight into the first game. Game 1, we're on the draw and we mulligan once, keeping our second to 7. Opponent starts with a green pathway into Gilded Goose and pass. We draw a card for turn, then start with a swamp into Dark Ritual to play our commander on turn 1. We make a token and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a tap land, and passes back. We untap, draw a card, and immediately go to combat, attacking for 3. Opponent blocks our 1/1 with their Goose. Post-combat, we play a land into a Rat Colony. Opponent untaps, plays a land, and casts Vastwood Surge without kicker to go get 2 forests before passing. On our turn, we start things off by playing another Rat Colony, which lets us eat the Vastwood Surge out of the graveyard. Then we play a tapped Aghanim and move to combat. We attack with everything, and our opponent blocks it with their face, taking 12 damage. On the opponent's turn, they untap, play a forest, and it looks like they've seen enough as they concede the game. Game 2, we're on the draw, and we keep at 7. Opponent starts with a Triumph. We play a Swamp. Opponent plays a Hinterland Harvest. We play a Swamp and cast a Rat Colony. Opponent plays a white pathway and casts Cultivate. They grab an island and a swamp and pass the turn. We untap, play a swamp, and drop Heraldic Banner, naming black. We attack for 3 and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a swamp, and runs out the 1 ring, giving themselves protection until their next turn. We untap, play Cabal Stronghold, and drop Bantu's Monument. Monument resolves, and it reduces the cost of our commander, so we run out Lord Skitter as well. We go to combat and make a rat token, which lets us eat their Cultivate. We attack for 0 because of the 1 ring, just to send a message and pass the turn. Opponent untaps and plays another Triumph. Next, they play their commander, Golos, which lets them go grab any land and play it tapped. They get the World Tree and pass the turn. We untap, play a land, and cast Vraska's Contempt on Golos. Afterwards, we play another Rat Colony before moving to combat. We make a rat token, attack for 13, and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a land, and drops Mind Flayer, which lets them steal a creature we control until Mind Flayer leaves the battlefield. They choose our commander and move to combat. Since they have our Lord Skitter now, they make a rat token and exile our Vraska's Contempt before passing the turn. We untap, play a swamp, and cast the Immortal Sun. We move to combat and attack with everything. Opponent casts March of Otherworldly Light on one of our rat colonies, then they block the other and take 6 from our tokens. We get our commander back and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, takes 0 to the 1 ring, and casts Cleansing Nova on creatures. Opponent drops a tap land and passes the turn. We untap, draw 2 swamps, and cast Lord Skitter. Monument triggers again, dealing the last point of damage to our opponent for the victory. Game 3, and we're on the play, keeping it 7. We start by playing a swamp and dropping Mox Amber now because I'm too lazy to hold on to it. Opponent draws a card for turn, plays a mountain, and passes. On our turn, we draw and play a Guardian Idol after we make a land drop and pass. Opponent untaps, plays a mountain, and casts Patchwork Automaton before passing. We untap, play a swamp, and cast Lord Skitter. This turns on our Mox Amber, so we get to cast a rat colony right away to go with it. We go to combat, make a token, and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a mountain, and casts Gingerbread, followed by a Zephyr Boots. From here, they play a Sticky Fingers on Patchwork before attacking for 3. They make a treasure token and pass the turn. We untap and immediately cast Crippling Fear on Rat. Patchwork is a problem if we don't get rid of it now as a 3/3, and this clears the Gingerbread so it's no longer a blocker. They draw a card with Sticky Fingers and we go to combat. We make a Rat token and we eat the Patchwork from the graveyard before attacking for 9. After combat, we play Agademe untapped, play another rat colony, eat their Gingerbread, and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays another mountain, and casts Pass the Torch on one of our colonies. They follow this up with a Legion Warboss, which makes them a token during combat, similar to Lord Skitter. They attack with it because Warboss says it must, we take it, and they pass the turn. We untap, draw, and play a swamp, and cast Vraska Betrayer's Sting. We take it down, turning Warboss into a treasure. This gets the blocker out of the way for us to swing with everything and deal 11 damage before we pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a mountain, and casts Inferno of the Star Mountains. Opponent passes, staying back to try and block. We untap and immediately take down Vraska again, turning the dragon into a treasure. We move to combat and make our token, but the opponent concedes before we can do anything else. Game 4, we're on the play and we keep at 7. We start things off by playing a swamp and passing. Opponent draws for the turn, plays a Temple of Malice, and scries to the top before passing themselves. We untap, play a swamp, and cast Cold Steelheart, choosing black and passing the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a mountain, and casts an Ornithopter of Paradise before passing it back. We untap, drop the Iron Crag, and cast Lord Skitter, declining Iron Crag's trigger. We move to combat to make a token and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays a Scalding Tarn and a Bitter Blossom before passing. We untap, and we try to play Gix Yawgmoth Praetor, which lets us draw cards whenever our creatures deal damage to a player, but our opponent had other plans. They decide to crack their Scalding Tarn and hit us with ye ol' Counterspell. We cast a Rat Colony, which eats the Counterspell, and we move to combat. We make another Rat token, eat the Scalding Tarn, and attack for 4 before passing. Opponent untaps, Bitter Blossom triggers, and they move to main. They cast their commander, Nicol Bolas, forcing us to discard a card, so we pitch our Rat Colony. Opponent passes it back to us. We untap and cast Bitter Triumph on Bolas and move to combat. We attack with Skitter and our token. Opponent blocks a token with their token and takes 4. After combat, we play another Rat Colony and pass the turn. Opponent untaps, plays an island, and casts Shieldred the Apocalypse. Next, they play a Lava Spur Boot and pass the turn. We untap and draw Lord Skitter's Butcher, which we play to choose the last mode and give our team Menace. We move to combat to make another rat and attack with everything. Opponent only has 2 blockers, so most of our small collection of rats will go unblocked, resulting in us stealing the victory once again. As we saw through the games, Lord Skitter is a powerhouse if he gets to sit on the board. He hoses graveyard strategies by exiling cards constantly, and while the tokens can't block, they do add up quickly, and they can apply a ton of pressure on their own if the opponent doesn't have a way to block them, while also exponentially growing our rat colonies. A few cards we didn't get to see that I wanted to show off include Karu Monix, the Rat King, Roaming Throne, and Chittering Host, which is melded from Graft Rats and Midnight Scavenger. Karumonix gives our rats Toxic 1, which is how we actually spread the plague to our opponents. He also lets us dig for more rats when he enters the battlefield. This was the original commander for this deck when I built it a few months ago, but you can't really abuse the ETB trigger very well, and most people die before the Toxic actually matters, so it was often just a 3-3 that maybe drew one card. I switched to Lord Skitter and I haven't looked back since, but Karumonix still deserves a slot in the 99. Roaming Throne lets us double up all of our rat triggers, but specifically Lord Skitter gives us double tokens every turn and we can eat the opponent's graveyard twice as fast. This benefits other rats too, and Ward makes it very difficult to remove. Lastly, Chittering Host is just a really flavorful card. I don't think I've ever successfully melded it outside of Draft when it was first printed, but if you ever do manage to meld it, it could end games pretty easily by giving our team menace like how we saw in the last game. Even if you can't meld it, Graft Rats is an efficiently costed 2-mana 2-1, and Midnight Scavenger is a 5-mana 3-3 that can return any creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to our hand. This includes our commander if it gets too expensive to cast from the command zone, and non-rat creatures like Gix and Ayara. On that note, this deck isn't invincible and is pretty vulnerable to enchantment decks and control. You should have the upper hand in most creature matches and against graveyard decks, but otherwise proceed with caution. Anyway, that's all for today. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you're subscribed so you can become a member of the Blue Crew today. You can find a link to the full deck list below in the description. While you're down there, go ahead and tap that like button too. It adds 1 mana to the YouTube algorithm and I greatly appreciate it. If you want to see more of my content, you can check out last week's video where we went to the hardware store and played Hammer Time, or you can click on this playlist and watch some of my shorts.